Okay, I was tempted to make this the shortest speech I've ever made by just standing up and saying, what a shit show, and sitting down, but I thought I probably shouldn't. So look, what I want to do really is, I want to start off by thinking about what I would maybe call the objective circumstances. You know, where did the demand for your party come from? And I want to argue there's three elements to that, really. The first of those elements, I think, is 40 years of what's now called neoliberalism, but 40 years in which wealth in this country has been extracted from us at greater and greater amounts and diverted into the fabulously wealthy. And that's taken a lot of different forms. When I started to do a lot of talks around your party, I would say, you know, one of the things about Britain is that we're the sixth richest country in the world. And when you say that to people who aren't all that politically active, or they look at you with some level of incredulity because they can't believe that we're the sixth richest country in the world. Because the reality is that for ordinary people, life is increasingly tough. I want to just give you one or two things about that. So in the last 5 years, food prices have gone up by 33% in this country. And when you say that, people nod their head, because everybody knows that when you go to whatever your supermarket of choice is, you just see the prices ratcheting up in front of your eyes all the time. In the same period, for the last 5 years, fuel prices, gas and electricity prices, they've gone up 40%. If you think about our housing costs, I know it's skewed by where you are in the country, but the average rental for housing costs in this country are £1,300 a month. So if you think about rent, food and fuel, there's an absolute crisis for people to just make sure that their kids are either eating or heating and have got somewhere to stay. And that choice means that every day in this country there's 1 million children go to their bed hungry. Right? What a disgrace in the sixth richest country in the world. So how has that happened? Well, I just want to give you some details and then, you know, we'll move on from there. But one of the things I've come to realise over the last few weeks, speaking at meetings over your party, was if you think about what used to be the nationalised industries. So I mean by that in its widest sense, from housing, buses, rail, gas, electricity, water, but all the things that we used to own. From the 1990s, as they've been privatised, those industries have handed over £193 billion in share dividends and profits to those at the very top of those industries. That's a phenomenal amount of money that has been pumped out of those industries that used to go back in to services. And we know, for example, in water, that they have taken that money out the waterways and they haven't put anything in to the water infrastructure. We now are in a situation where shit flows into our rivers and seas, and they want us to pay the price which they haven't invested in over the last 20 years. What an absolute mess that is in terms of those industries. And then the other aspect of that is the way in which the fabulously wealthy in this country have increased their fabulous wealth over that 40-year period. You know, the Times, every May, the Times produces their Sunday Times Rich List. And they used to do that as a celebration of, oh, look how fantastically rich we are. It's quite interesting because they used to do the wealth of the 1,000 wealthiest people, but that became so obscene that they now only give us the fabulously wealthy of the top 350 people. So they've cut it down because the numbers are getting that big. And one of the interesting things is, not that this is a defence of the royal family, I want to make it clear, but when they started the Sunday Times Rich List and they had their list of the richest people in Britain, the Queen was in the top 10. The Queen, obviously she's dead, but apart from that, her offspring are nowhere near the top 10 wealthiest people in Britain. And in fact, the 350 wealthiest people in Britain have got a combined wealth of £772 billion in total, right? £772 billion. That is double what we spend on combined pensions, education and health, right? What the government spends on total on health, on education and pensions comes to about £460 billion. So just 350 families have huge wealth running at that rate. And when we talk about wealth taxes, just taking 1 or 2% off them, that doesn't really cut it. We should be taking far more than that. But if we were to take far more than that, then one of the arguments is, oh, well, you can only do that once. How will they get that back? It's a one-hit take at it. Well, those 350 people in Britain, their wealth increases £896 a second. Now, that doesn't sound very much, but the time you get to 24 hours a day, if you work that out, that's £77 million every day is the increase in their wealth. So if you take half their wealth off them, this time next year, they'll have it back, okay? That's the reality of the situation that we could be doing. So one of the objective factors, I think, is the gross levels of inequality in this country and the way in which our former nationalised industries have been privatised, with profits being pumped out of the system for the benefit of the fabulously wealthy, and all of us, as a consequence of that, having services which are just in absolute decline, and we see them falling about our ears as a consequence of that. So that's one, I think, of the factors at play here. The second factor, I think, is summed up in Stammer, but it's actually going back longer, and that is the complete disconnect between the political establishment. Because whether you're Labour or Tory, for the last 40 years, both have been in power, and in fact, for a while, it was a Tory-Lib Dem coalition. So the political parties, all of them, are all steeped and into their neck in this system of corruption, this system of pumping wealth away from ordinary people up to those at the very, very top. And of course, throughout that time, we've seen increasing scandals of what politicians are absolutely like, claiming, I don't know if you have expenses at work, I'm sure you don't, and if you do, I'm sure you don't claim for packets of biscuits, but when you have MPs who, as part of their expenses, claim for ginger nut biscuits and chocolate bourbons, or for duck ponds being cleaned, or for whatever the various things that they have, the sort of stench of sort of corruption around MPs has opened up that disconnect as well. And then there's the fact of what the politicians of whatever persuasion have done in terms of protecting the wealthy and targeting various sections of working class people at various different points. And that came to a head, I think, after Stammer. There wasn't many of us had many illusions, but almost as soon as he was in the door, he started to make it clear that he was going to renege on his promise to the WASPy women. He was going to cut the winter fuel allowance for our elderly. He was going to impose the two-child benefit cap, which, interestingly, they're now saying that they're going to remove in conjunction with welfare reform. So I'm sure each and every one of us knows what that means. Right, we'll give you your two-cap benefit back, but we're just going to make sure that there's more welfare cuts somewhere else in the system. So complete disillusionment with the political establishment of all coloration at a time of objectively horror at what is happening to Britain. And then the third factor is really the growth of the social movements, and in particular the Palestine movement over the last 2 years. Because it's been a focus, of course, against the horror of genocide, of course, for the horror of what our government has included in that, but it's opened up so many other questions about welfare, not warfare, so many questions about the authoritarianism of this government, and so many questions about political representation when the vast majority of us want an immediate ceasefire, when the majority of us want to isolate the State of Israel, and the governments, whether it's Tory or Labour, continue to support the State of Israel. And of course, the Palestine movement was at the heart of what happened at the general election 18 months ago, when for the first time we saw 5 independent MPs elected, which gave us the biggest left of Labour return that this country has ever seen. And it wasn't just the 5 MPs in constituencies across the country. There was fantastically big votes for those who stood as pro-Gaza, pro-Palestine independence, in a level that we had not seen at any time in our history. And therefore, it was obvious that there was a constituency for an alternative, and there was the objective circumstances that was driving that, and together those things were calling out for something which became your party. Now, my own particular take on this is that your party should have been announced in the run-up to the general election. It wasn't. The day after the general election with 5 MPs, we should have announced it then. And if it wasn't going to be announced then, it should have been announced each single day until we eventually got it. It was far, far too long to get to that point, and that we did. But the demand that was there was immediately shown when close to 800,000 people sign up for more information about what's going on. It shows that there is demand for an alternative to the mainstream politics in our country. Now, then we get into what kind of party should your party be? And what we've seen really from those at the top of your party has been, to take us back to my opening words, a bit of a shit show. There are all different forms in which that's happened. But, you know, for people at the top threatening to take legal action against each other, denouncing each other, going to the press, not even the so-called left-wing press, but going to whatever Murdoch's favourite rag is at this particular point in time and briefing against each other is simply not acceptable. And the consequence of that is that instead of having, we were never going to get 800,000 members, but instead of having 400,000, you know, 1 in 2, or maybe even 250 or 300,000, we've got 50,000 people signed up. Now, there's two things I want to say about that. First of all, 50,000 isn't bad for a left of Labour organisation. It's bigger than the Independent Labour Party had at its height, which was 37,000. It's bigger than the Communist Party had in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War when it was at its height, 47,000. So 50,000 isn't bad from that perspective. But given what was possible, I think that explains some of the sort of discontent that people feel that it could have been so much better. But the context of this has been the growing feud between the two main signatories to what your party was about. And at heart, although politically each of them probably don't have a lot that divides them, they have come to enshrine two different models, I think, of what your party should be. And I want to disagree with both of them, to be honest with you. First of all, around Jeremy, sometimes people say, well, this is the Labour Party Mark II. I'm not quite sure if that's accurate, but what I think is accurate is that those round about Jeremy, those that were in Lotto, the office of the leader of the opposition office is Lotto, they want to make sure that they remain firmly in control, that this is MP-led, and that the focus of this new party is on Parliament and in councils and those who are selected in those points of view. And that's something that I think is wrong, because if we look at the factors that I was trying to introduce earlier on, then certainly the Palestine movement and our own movements, the trade union movements, the community movements, have to play a much more vibrant and larger role in what this new party can be. So on the one hand, we've got those who want a very top-down model of what your party should be, and that's not the model that I would like. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. But on the other hand, we've also got Zara. And it seems to me that for whatever reasons, when she was pushed out early on, Zara has taken a position of trying to deepen the political divide to make it clear where they disagree with each other. So early on, we had a strange claim that she was an anti-Zionist and Jeremy wasn't, really, because he hadn't said that. And I've been at assemblies and meetings where people from the far left stand up and say that Jeremy Corbyn is a Zionist. Well, I'm sorry, comrades, right? If you want to think of one politician in Parliament who for 20, 30 years has spoken out for the Palestinians, who the Palestinians themselves see as one of their own, it's Jeremy Corbyn. It's a ludicrous accusation to make of Jeremy, but yet it's been done to try and polarise a debate within your party. So there's that. There's the accusation that some of the MPs were socially conservative. Now, there's lots of different takes on what we mean by that. But if you only want to talk to the other people in this room, if you want to tap the shoulder of the person beside you, behind you, and you want to talk about forming our own party there, maybe that's where we could draw the line. But if we want to talk to the millions of working class people in this country, up and down this country, who are desperate for an alternative, and if we don't provide it, just may, turn towards reform, then we've got to be open to the debates that we should have in those areas. We have to think about what we have in common. We have to think about the 80% that we share in common in this room and outside, that we want renationalisation of railways, we want renationalisation of the water, we want a wealth tax on the fantastically wealthy, we want a change away from VAT towards direct taxation with the wealthy paying their share. For far too long they've had it easy, they have to pay for now. We want an end to the sort of the warfare economy, we want an emphasis on the welfare economy, and we think about those terms. That is the types of policies that engage with the vast majority in our society. That's the 80%. Now, of course, there will then be the areas where we disagree, the 20%. The immature organisation of the left, What we have to say is that 20% should be the area of debate. We should create safe spaces where we can have those debates and they don't become red lines where we split, because we've had too much of that for too long on the left. So what kind of party do we want? I think we want a broad left of Labour party, a party that can speak for and to the millions. I think we want an insurgent party of the left, one that uses the 800,000, if we can get back to that number, to make sure that they are active in their communities, so that when there's a demonstration for Palestine, they're the ones that are building that in their communities. They're coming to the demonstration and they're bringing other people with them. We won't be the only people. The Greens will be there, the trade unions will be there, the Labour Party should be there, but we hope that your party becomes a central part in building the Palestine movement, our trade unions, our campaigns against austerity and whatever. So it has to be an insurgent movement with roots in the trade unions and with roots in our communities in that way. And therefore, from that, it then selects its own candidates for Parliament and for councils who see themselves as being tied to and representatives of those movements. I've said before, there's a very old and very bad joke by Billy Connolly that if anybody wants to be a politician, that by default should rule them out. And I must admit, over the last few months, it's a far more attractive option than it ever was before. But we don't mean that exactly, but that should not be people's motivations. What we want is people who are motivated to deepen the struggles, to be the megaphones for our movements. We want to challenge capital. We want to be involved in the campaigns to make sure that Britain becomes a country where it's much more focused on fighting racism rather than pampering to racism. That is much more focused on feeding the welfare services that we require rather than privatising those services and making the rich richer. And it's one that says that we're going to make the rich pay because for far, far too long they've had it all their own way.